I'm pleased to be joined by Matthew Higgins, Vice President for Strategic Planning for the New York Jets, and Louis Coletti, President of the Building Trade Employers Association. He represents the major general contractors and construction managers in New York City. Gentlemen, welcome to CityWide. So New York Sports and Convention Center has a rather dramatic ring to it. Are we talking about a football stadium? And if so, why should New York build it?
Well, I think the fact that it has a rather cumbersome name, there's a reason for it. It's because it's not just a football stadium. It's going to be a first-class sports and convention center. It'll be a venue for big events like the Super Bowl, and it'll also have a 200,000 square foot convention center space.
So tell us a little bit about the proposal. How big is it? How many people?
Yeah, it's going to be located between 11th and 12th Avenues over the rail yards, which are currently unused space right now, between 30th and 33rd Street. It's going to have 75,000 seats to serve as a stadium, but it's also going to incorporate a world-class sports and convention center of 200,000 square feet, column-free space.
How does that compare to the Javits Center?
The Javits Center is about 730,000 square feet, but obviously it has columns. This is a column-free space. It goes after the mid-sized convention centers. New York really doesn't have a first-class space that can do that.
Why is this important to New York, Lou?
It'll provide thousands of jobs that will rebuild our middle class, not only during the construction phase, but the types of jobs that will be created going on as the project goes on, gets completed, and we get new development on the west side. I mean, Ken, it's really one of the last great opportunities we have to build a new neighborhood on the west side, and that's why it's so exciting. Jobs, tax benefits for residents of all 5 boroughs.
But what does that have to do with this proposal? Because you've got basically a big piece of undeveloped land, the rail yards, publicly owned on the west side. There's a plan to rezone the west side to allow residential and office development. All that's going to happen whether there's a football stadium there or not.
This project becomes the catalyst for that to happen sooner rather than later. And we need jobs now. We need tax revenue now. The longer we wait, the more we will put ourselves in the hole, both from a budgetary standpoint and the creation of the jobs we need to grow this economy.
So what kind of jobs do you see coming out of a project like this?
Well, obviously the construction jobs will come first, but you'll see hotel and retail jobs come up. During that process, you'll see the residential and the commercial development begin to develop as time goes on, and you'll see jobs that middle-class New Yorkers will have an ability to get. You know, the jobs that are being created here are just Wall Street and service jobs making $8, $9, $10 an hour. The City Council 10 years ago, 12 years ago, did a dramatic study that showed in 1998 there were less people making middle income level income than there was in 1977. We still haven't replaced those jobs. This kind of project will create that environment for the types of jobs to rebuild the middle class that this city needs.
Well, wait a second, but you told me it's going to be office jobs and it's going to be service jobs that for the, you know, people, the tourists that come.
But they're going to be higher level paying service jobs, jobs that have pensions, jobs that have annuities, health benefit programs, not the McDonald's $5 an hour job.
What city has successfully had a neighborhood redevelopment strategy around the football stadium?
Well, there's this folklore that stadiums make no positive contribution to the environment that they're in. Simply not true. I just, in fact, went on a tour around the country to look at different facilities. Went to Camden Yards, went to Philadelphia. Detroit has had great experience. There's examples all over the.
Those are all baseball stadiums, or?
And football stadiums as well. There's examples all over the country when a football stadium, because oftentimes they're in areas that are underdeveloped, underutilized. You know, warehouses around Seattle, for example. And what you see is it shows that somebody is a willing investor and other investors follow. Certainly on the west side of Manhattan, we believe that's going to happen.
The west side of Manhattan, one would argue, though, is probably the most valuable undeveloped real estate in the world. And don't you think that that growth would happen whether this facility gets built or not? In other words, if you were going to take the same amount of public resources and put them into jump-starting development, wouldn't you get the same benefits out of it regardless of whether you built the stadium?
And how long do we have to wait for that to happen?
Well, isn't that a function of the political will of the mayor and the governor?
Yes, and I think right now we have that political will to expand the Javits Center, to build the stadium, to start that unprecedented opportunity for economic growth, an opportunity that will not come along again. That's what makes this project so special and so unique, and it's so important that we put the shovel in the ground as fast as possible. The longer we wait to minimize what we have at the Javits Center, the more revenue we're losing, because we, for the first time in a long time, have shows that want to come into New York and can't. Do we wait 15 years? Do we develop some other plan and then debate it for another 15 years like we've done with Westway? I mean, I look at those designs for the highway and I see the same designs and say to myself, haven't I seen this somewhere before? Sure. They're the plans that we defeated and gave back $1 billion to the federal government. That's $1 billion that's coming out of federal money today to be spent on that roadway that we could have used for something else. That's why this project needs to move quickly.
So walk me through the economics of the project, if you will, and tell me what the relationship is between the Jets and the convention center, and why we couldn't just build a 200,000 square foot convention center and not have to deal with the large crowds that your team hopefully will attract.
For one thing, people say this is the most valuable undeveloped land in New York, but yet it's remained undeveloped for decades. And people have had dreams and ambitions for that site, and nothing has materialized. And the reason being is that it requires a platform to be built over both rail yards in order for any development. And second of all, no private investor has come along and said they're willing to invest $800 million to build something on that area of Manhattan. So what needs to happen first is a platform over the rail yards. The city and state will share the cost of that. The Jets are funding the entire cost of the stadium, which is $800 million. In addition, the Jets have guaranteed that they will cover any cost overruns. And the city and state will contribute the cost of the roof. So for a $600 million contribution from the public sector, it'll generate $75 million a year in taxes versus $40 million a year in debt service.
And Lou, don't you think if the government spent the same $600 million to create the platform and then held an auction, that you don't think that big developers, related company, and others wouldn't step forward and say, we'll build on the site and we'll guarantee you $75 million a year in taxes?
Two answers, Ken. My first reaction is no, because right now the market might not be amenable to the types of projects that we're in terms of residential and commercial development. And second of all, the Jets are saying, I'll spend my $800 million tomorrow. And I don't think there's any developer that's willing to do that.
And second of all, you have to accept that it's worthwhile to have a first-class sports and convention center in New York, that New York should have a showcase, a way to compete for the Super Bowl, a way to compete for Final Four, a way to compete for conventions, 1,600 of them that can't come to the city right now. If you don't accept that, then there's no point having the debate.
Yeah, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to separate the convention business, which I understand, and the football business, which I understand less so. What would the Super Bowl coming to New York mean for New York?
It would mean about $300 million in economic impact, but fiscal impact about $27 million.
Tell me about that.
Well, the impact comes from people coming and renting hotel rooms, people coming and shopping in restaurants around the neighborhood, people staying, going to stores. But it's about $27 million. Altogether, the stadium generates $75 million, of which that assumes about 2 super events a year. We assume we're going to get the Super Bowl about once every 5 years, and we're pretty confident the NFL is going to award New York the Super Bowl in its home city.
You know, Ken, I was involved with the private company I worked with in building Camden Yards. And it becomes more than just going to a football game or a baseball game. It becomes a day-long event. You go there 3-4 hours before the game, and you walk around, and there are shops there, and you grab a sandwich, and you have a beer, and you walk around and buy a T-shirt. And then you go to the game, and then you don't want to get caught in the traffic, so you spend another hour or two after the game. That's the environment that's going to be created by this project moving forward. This becomes phase one, and you're going to watch a lot of other retail, commercial enterprises grow, and you're going to see people come to the West Side. And that's what I think is the real success and the real visionary planning that has occurred for this project.
One school of thought on the convention center expansion, as opposed to this additional building, is that they should turn it perpendicular, run it out over the highway, and not have a multi-block wall between the new neighborhood and the waterfront. Is that possible? Can we do that?
That I'd have to defer to the planners.
I mean, that's certainly not the plan on the table. I don't know if it's possible. I think it would probably be quite expensive, and it would take Westway, you saw what happened with that. So I think to deck over the highway with a new convention center might be difficult. But I just want to go back and address real quickly what you had said about why not simply just expand the convention center south, right? Well, if that be the case, you'd still need a platform, so you'd still need a $400 million investment. You'd still need a roof over it, which is $200 million. And then the government would have to pay for the cost of the 200,000 square feet. The Javits Center expansion is $1.1 billion to double the size of Javits. To actually it's about add about 400,000 square feet. So you're talking about a significantly larger public investment for the same result.
How will the economics work once the facility is built? Who controls the site? Who gets the revenue from the shows? The Javits Center loses money, but the government doesn't mind because you make it up with tourism. How will the new facility operate?
Well, for one thing, the facility is going to be owned by the government, some type of entity that's still being worked out. But it's not going to be owned by the Jets. The Jets will be a tenant among many. There'll be restaurants in the facility. There'll be retail stops.
Will you be managing the facility?
We're still working it out. We'd actually be happy to form a partnership with the Javits Center on the convention side of the business. So, but we're still working it out. We're still actually persuading people that this is a worthwhile project. So.
Well, it's also, it does beg the question. You are, in effect, spending $800 million to build a corporate headquarters that you're going to use 8 days a year. It
shows you how committed we are.
Well, just tell me how the economics of a football team works.
Well, the economics, it's one of the reasons why this location is prime, because the economics of football stadium are largely driven by suite sales. They're driven by club seats and the like, and that's where you make the money. But yeah, it's a tremendous amount of risk that we're taking as a team, $800 million. It's certainly the most amount of money ever invested in a facility. But we think Manhattan is such a prime location that we'll be able to do it.
We're going to continue this conversation about the proposed West Side Javits Center expansion, Convention Center expansion, and the Jets right after this.
There is really only one boy, one girl, one tree, one forest, one ocean, one mountain, one sky, and one simple way to care for it all. Please visit earthshare.org and learn how the world's leading environmental groups are working together under one name, EarthShare. One environment, one simple way to care for it.
Welcome back to CityWide. We're speaking with Matthew Higgins of the New York Jets and Louis Coletti, president of the Building Trade Employers Association. Our topic is a Jet Stadium and expanded convention center on the west side of Manhattan. Why is this controversial?
Ken, this is New York. Whenever you do anything of this magnitude or this scale, there will always be those individuals who cannot see the greater good. I mean, let's face it, I have a special interest. Everybody has a special interest. But I recently read a quote from de Tocqueville, who said that he was amazed at the American democratic system on how special interests argue their points, yet in the end it comes out in the right way for democracy.
Yeah, but Lou, you represent an industry association that likes to build things. If the government said that they were going to spend $600 million to build the Sphinx on the west side of Manhattan, you'd probably support that also.
Ken, that's not true. Many years ago, when one of the first designs came out for the Columbus Circle project, Moshe Safdie's design, we opposed it. So we're not in the habit of just endorsing projects and building anything that comes in sight. This is a project that makes economic sense. It makes sense for the further development of New York's West Side. Our waterfront should be an embarrassment to everyone. Look at every other waterfront across the nation and the world, and then walk on the West Side. You shake your head. This is an opportunity to create a vision that's not going to come along many more times, and that's why we want to seize the opportunity and start it and build it now.
How critical is the construction of this stadium to New York City's bid for the Olympics in 2012?
Well, I think the bid can't succeed. I mean, there's no doubt. And not only can it not succeed in terms of hosting the Olympics, I don't think it's going to effectively be able to compete for the Olympics if the project is not well underway, certainly given what's happening right now in Athens. So it's really do or die time as far as the stadium is concerned.
Okay, so now let me ask the flip side of that question, which is, given the fact that this is not just New York, as you said, but this is the West Side. This is the Westway Killers. These are people who, at childhood, learned how to bring lawsuits and demonstrate and testify. Aren't we running a tremendous risk if our proposal is linked to a site in what is such a contentious area?
Well, for one thing, I don't think you don't do this project solely for the Olympics. That can't be the justification for the public investment. It can't be the justification for the Jets investment. The project has to stand on alone, which is why it has all these different dimensions to it. That being said, I think we're prepared. We're prepared for the litigation. We're prepared for the opposition. We recognize that it's out there. We also think it's mostly locally confined to the neighborhood, and we're prepared to meet it. So we don't think that we should shy away from developing the area just because people have effectively blocked development for decades. I mean, that's not something to brag about. It's something to be somewhat ashamed of. This area of Manhattan should be developed.
The folks who are involved with Madison Square Garden have expressed some real reservations about this project also. they have indicated a desire to rebuild Madison Square Garden. Is there any way to mesh everybody's interests instead of having them perhaps support the opposition?
Well, I'll tell you, we've been talking to them for a long time. We talked to them over the last couple of years and tried to sort of unite our interests. We wanted to work together with Madison Square Garden. That's been rejected. So from what I understand, they are opposing it. They're working with various groups to try to fight the stadium. I don't know why. I think it's in everyone's interest to have healthy competition. We're not providing an arena, so we don't directly compete. And New York should have a first-class facility to showcase our events.
Let's talk about traffic. On 75,000 people on a good Sunday are all going to come within a relatively short period of time. Many of them are going to want to come by car. Tailgate is part of the culture. What's it going to mean for people in that neighborhood to have all of that traffic?
Well, for one thing, the reason why stadiums work in urban environments is because they tend to have this massive transportation infrastructure that's underutilized on the weekends. It's meant to serve rush hour. So that's what we have in Manhattan. We asked our fans, if we put a stadium on the west side of Manhattan, how would you get there? And it turns out that it's no secret where Penn Station is. They go there all the time for events, for concerts, and to go to work. 70% said they would take mass transit to the games. 30% said they would still drive. So that breaks down to 7,000 cars on a Sunday. The George Washington Bridge on a Sunday is handling 150,000 cars. So the space is there to accommodate them, and we're going to do everything we can to encourage people to take ferries.
But how are they going to get, it's a long walk from Penn Station to where you're proposed to be.
If you overlay, I don't know if you've been to a game at Meadowlands, but you can overlay the parking lot right over that area, and you see it extends all the way to Penn Station. The longest walk is 20 minutes in the parking lot. Jets fans can make the walk.
Yeah, but that's after they've spent the half an hour tailgating. Where are people going to tailgate at your new stadium?
Well, for one thing, we're gonna come up with plans to tailgate in Jersey. We're gonna work there's parking lots all over Jersey. We're gonna try to combine them with a ferry package to encourage people in Jersey to drive and take the ferry. And second thing, you'll find all over the country in urban stadiums, people adapt. They go to the restaurants. There's one of the major reasons people tailgate in the Meadowlands is because there's nowhere to go. You got to get there 3 hours in advance because of the parking trouble. So,
Matt, I know that you're relatively new to the Jets organization, but can you tell me, how could such sophisticated people get themselves into a situation where they're the only major professional sports team that doesn't own their own stadium or doesn't control their own stadium? You're stepchild to the Giants, and you're in the middle of nowhere. How'd you get into that mess?
Well, I can't be blamed for the sins of the organization going back, but part of it is a testimonial on how hard it is in New York to get a facility for yourself, even when the economics make sense, even when you have a willing investor, even when you have a team everyone loves. It's very, very difficult. And Woody Johnson bought the team 3 years ago and said, "This is my priority, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes." So finally, you have the will, finally, you have the support of the mayor and the governor, and you have a great plan.
Lou, what's your take on the transportation plan? All kidding aside, is extension of the 7 line or some type of light rail or some other mass transit extension essential, not necessarily for a single football game, but in order for the Javits Center and its expansion to realize its full potential, for the West Side to develop as you envision it, don't we have to invest an awful lot of money in improving mass transit in that area?
I think we have to invest that money whether the Jet Stadium gets built or not. I think one of the failures of the Javits Center now is that most people that come in and stay for a night, stay for a couple of nights, have to take a cab that add to that congestion to get from their hotel rooms over to the convention site. I think this plan will allow an expansion of the mass transit system. Again, you're going to draw people to the West Side. There are going to be other activities to go to. You go to the game. You go to a function in the stadium, you go to a trade show, you walk out, and you're going to have stores, retail stores, people will live in the neighborhood. There's going to be a beautiful waterfront. We haven't touched upon the fact that there's going to be 20 acres of parkland, trees, recreational opportunities. You make it an entire day. And again, I want to refer to what I said before about Camden Yards. When I took my family to the game, we spent 7 or 8 hours there just walking around. That's the type of environment that this project will create.
So the public has to make an additional investment, and maybe they would be making this investment anyway, in an extension of the subway line. Is that doable in the political environment we have, the competition for resources, the controversies that'll engender? How certain can we be that the West Side will get the mass transit infrastructure that's going to be necessary to make all of this work?
I think it's a sense of priorities, and I think when you get the governor and the mayor fully behind a project of this nature, I think the chances of it are happening are good. I mean, obviously there's a political dialogue that has to go along with the legislative branch, but it's taken us this long to get the mayor and the governor on the same page. And I've got to think that's a very powerful force.
And are they in agreement now as to the route of which train line should be extended and which direction it should go? Is that all resolved at this point?
I don't know that every detail has been resolved, but I think they're much further along in this process than any governor or mayor has been in recent history.
Let's talk about process for a second. You all commissioned a feasibility study that has been presented to the city on the economics of the deal. Newspaper reports indicate that the city has bought into that and without doing their own independent analysis, which they have done in other types of similar situations. Wouldn't you be better off if the city went out and hired their own experts to double check your proposal?
I'd be better off if the New York Times would go out and hire their own experts. You know, we went out there, we commissioned our own studies because there has to be a debate over the merits, the substantive merits of the proposal. So we looked at, the cost of construction. Tishman did the report pro bono, and Ernst & Young did a report on the economics. As far as the city taking a look, EDC's own staff has been looking at it. ESD is actually in the process of putting together an analysis. So it's not the case.
Yeah, but you mean to tell me, Matt, that if I went out and I got Ernst & Young to do a feasibility study on some idea that I had for selling, I don't know, soy hot dogs at the stadium, and I walked in and said, look, here's this great proposal, you wouldn't do your own analysis of it?
No, and one of my point to you is they are doing their own analysis. Their own staff has been analyzing it, and so has ESD. It just hasn't been released yet, and I think the Times, to some extent, jumped the gun on it. But regardless, even if that is the case, even if the city hadn't taken a look, why not evaluate the numbers? I mean, anyone could turn around and say $75 million is inaccurate for whatever reason. The conventions you estimate are not going to materialize. And then we could debate the merits. There's a tendency to dismiss the numbers because they're being offered by us. And what we say is, well, offer your own data.
I want to ask one question on the sort of the challenge in managing a facility like that. Let's assume you overcome all of these obstacles. There's God forbid, a terrorist attack. There's a spike in fuel oil, aviation fuel, and tourism tanks. How do you forecast the kinds of challenges that go into operating something as complicated as this, and which is so dependent on people's perception of their need? In other words, it's not absolutely that you got to have this thing. It's that people are going to choose to come there. We're not talking about a hospital. And what if the atmosphere for the kind of events that you hope to attract changes?
I just don't see it happening. I mean, this is New York. We weathered 9/11. I mean, the most catastrophic terrorist event ever visited on our country, and we weathered that. I just think there's always going to be a demand to come to the capital of the world and to bring your greatest events here. I just can't imagine when people are skeptical that we're not going to be able to bring world-class events to this city. And we're getting unsolicited phone calls from conventioneers who say, sign me in. How do I be the first show in your new facility?
And if everything goes well, opening day will be?
2009.
My thanks to Matthew Higgins, Vice President of the New York Jets, and Louis Coletti, President of the Building Trade Employers Association. That's all for this edition of CityWide. I'm Ken Fisher. Thank you for joining us.